So again, welcome everyone to today's session. We are talking about SEs or standard evaluations. The goal at this time of year, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, is that the season has come to a close, more or less, but now might be the best time actually to plan ahead for next year, specifically in today's topic on describing your assessments. We may have a good idea of all the pain points and things we just got done doing in this past research season. If we take a little bit of time now in preparation, we're going to save ourselves a lot of time and be a lot more efficient next year in ARM by utilizing these SEs. So just to, I guess, introduce the idea here of why to use standard evaluations. I guess first I should give the definition. If you haven't seen an SE before, it is basically a virtual clipboard, if you will, of copying information from your header section of an assessment. So that seems to be kind of the most common action if you're in a trial or you're starting a protocol and you open up last year's trial and you just grab that header section, the top half describing what was done in the assessment, and I'm going to perform that same assessment again. So I should just reuse that same description, and then I'll just copy paste and then tweak, maybe delete the date, change the whatever other references don't quite match, and then I'm on my way. That's essentially what an SE is. We're really doing that same process of copying all of that header information, but we gain a few advantages by using this feature. You're not required to open up a study and go find a thing. We're saving it as a file so you can access it again and again. And you'll see as we create them today that we can be very choosy in what we grab. So we don't always have to delete out the rating date or clear out the pest stage information because the new column we don't want that filled in, things like that. So that's what an SE is, and really the reasons to utilize them might vary slightly depending on your role, how you fit with ARM, how you're using ARM. But I think both protocol writers and trialists definitely stand to benefit from using SEs. And so I've tried to just kind of split in general the two different groups here, but I think there's valid reasons for both. If you're writing protocols, planning out the next year's study, this is such a great way to standardize your data. Primary goal being, if you have 5 trialists that are going to go out and perform the exact same study just in their own locations, and you just tell them to perform, go take notes on the pest severity and yield, you're going to end up with 5 different ways to describe that exact same assessment when they all come back to you. So instead, we really want the same description from each and every one of them, so that way it's so much easier to combine and summarize when the data is back in, which leads to that multi-trial analysis that if you've ever used ST, the summary across trials, it becomes super obvious very quickly why you want to standardize the descriptions. It's just so much faster to bring things together. If all of the trials have the same descriptions, it's just like 3 clicks and boom, you have a summary. You're combining your data. Whereas when things are messy, everyone has put things in the way they wanted to instead, then suddenly you have to learn all these tricks and ways to combine columns and switch things around. And it's just a lot more work to bring that information together. So SEs will save so much time especially in the busiest time of year when you're getting trials back. It's very much worth it in that regards. For the trialists, even if you aren't in that boat of that multi-trial analysis, just the trialist performing this trial, there's still benefits to be had for these SEs. It's really an automation, if you will, of that scenario I described, where you're copying and putting in all of the headers for the assessment. If you perform that assessment again and again, why not automate that? So with 2 clicks of a button, you have that entire column filled in with what it was that you're doing, and then you can get to taking the data. So you're really gonna save time by not having to fill that in every time. And as a result of using them, the trials that you're producing are going to be more consistent and thus be more valuable. So the better trials that you create, that consistency, especially if you were provided from that protocol writer and used their SEs, you have more value to that sponsor by having everything the way they want it, because they will benefit, like we just said, with that multi-trial analysis. Their whole workflow is so much smoother when they're getting your data back because you've taken that time to use the SEs and have that standard format, so it'll just go right into their system. And that's can only be a good thing for you to be more valuable to the sponsors. All right, with that, let's actually dive into our SEs. And we've alluded to kind of what they are already, and we'll actually jump into ARM here in a moment. But first, just to give an overview of an SE, it's really got three components to it, and we'll see each one of those as we create one in ARM in a moment. But when you go to create an SE, ARM will first ask, what columns do you want to use in that trial or the protocol to create an SE? So you can choose one or more columns. It's possible to define several different assessments, bundle them all together in a single standard evaluation. Or if it's simplest, just the one column for the one thing that I'm doing. Either one works. Then the next question, once you've selected which columns to do, ARM then will allow you to choose specifically what rows from that description that you actually want to save. So that idea of, well, I definitely don't want to save the rating date because every time I do an assessment, it's going to be a different date. So it wouldn't make sense that the date would never be standard. But things like your part rated, the rating type, the unit, those types of things, that's exactly what I want to save. That's what I want to reuse every single time. So an advantage here as well, compared to copying the entire section and just pasting, is now we can be choosy. We can strategize about what we actually want to include and to be standard in the assessment. And then finally, there is the opportunity, if you have study rules in those columns that you've chosen, you can also include those rules in your SE. And that really ups the game, if you will, for especially that protocol writer. If you're used to building rules into your studies, this is a great way to make sure that assessment specific rules get applied when the assessment is happening. There can be obvious things like your rating date. Well, that probably should be on for every column in any study, because I need the rating date. But you can be more strategic with maybe crop stage information. Well, for my yield, I don't need that. I know what the stage is at that point in time, doesn't matter. But for a Phi-Gen rating or whatever I'm trying to take, that specific assessment, I do need that information. So it can be real helpful to get those study rules in there as well, to make sure that the most important information that we want to be recorded at the time of the assessment we can make sure it gets included here as well. And we're not just talking about the description of the column now, but even the rules and reminders of what I want to fill in when the data is being taken. All right, that's enough PowerPoint for now. Let's go into ARM and actually kind of work with SEs here. So right now I have a trial open, and kind of from this time of year's perspective, this is kind of one of our recommended tricks, is to use the most recent trial that you've worked on. For a couple of reasons. Number one, you already have descriptions filled in, so you don't necessarily have to start from scratch to decide everything you want to fill in. It can also be a good reminder of any pain points. Hey, you know what? I had to ask for the rating date a bunch of times. I should just add a study rule. So I can right click, and at the bottom here, I could require that gets filled in. So having the most recent file can be a great way to jog your memory a little bit of what things are causing issues, so that way we can do something about it next year, so we don't have all of those struggles. So what I want to do here in this trial is create an SE from these descriptions that I've used. So what I'll probably start with, I've got a phytotoxicity rating for my crop. Let's say that is super common. I'm doing that all of the time. So how about let's standardize that and let me save this description to use again and again. So I'm going to right click really anywhere in this column that I'm interested in saving. And in the right click, we can export an SE. So we're really going to create an SE file. So from this trial that we're looking at, we'll generate a brand new file. So you'll see ARM kind of starts this wizard, and like we said, the first step is to choose one or more assessment columns that we're going to use to create this SE. And if you've done any reporting or things like that, where you're selecting columns, you're familiar with this dialog and how it works. You can simply click on column numbers or really anywhere in the column, and that'll highlight and select it. You can click again to deselect to turn them off, or if it's simplest, you can just type in this box, 1 through 4, 1 space 3, however you want to make your selection. In my case, I just want one column. This will be a single column SE. And we'll move to the second step, where we will get to choose what information we want to include. And you'll notice on the screen, I actually don't see the entire header information. ARM tries to hide some of the details that realistically you wouldn't want to include in an SE, like the rating date, interval fields, things like that really don't make a lot of sense for standardization. So it's kind of nudged me here into just a few fields in this case. If I want to see everything, and maybe this is cheating a little bit, but I think it's helpful, especially when seeing this the first time. It is possible to sneak over here to the properties, and I'm just going to turn on all of the fields real quick, just so we can see that they all are available to me if I want. And right now I have some highlighted. Those were just because ARM remembers the selection I did the last time I created an SE. So if you've never created an SE before, this is probably going to start out blank. But same thing as before, you can click on, in this case, the rows that we care about, and it will add these numbers. And there's a number next to each of these rows. So that'll tell you how to refer to any of those particular rows. So, logically speaking, like we said, the rating date and time, that doesn't make sense to standardize. And actually, with our new grouping, we kind of are nudging people into how to think about what might be a good thing to include in a standard evaluation. So this grouping here really kind of helps direct us to at least what to consider for standardizing. So it's got those big three of the part rated, rating type, rating unit. That's kind of a slam dunk. That's usually the heart of a description of what is performed. Of course, if you're doing any sampling, that can be important as well. Maybe the number of subsamples is nice to include too. If I go down to some of the rest of these fields, we've got all of the crop and pest related information. In general, it probably, you wouldn't have to include the crop information unless the SE I'm wanting to create is very crop specific. Or maybe in my research, I'm only a winter wheat person. That's literally the only thing I ever do. In that case, I might as well include it. Then that information will always be preloaded, if you will, into my assessments. But I'm guessing a little unlikely that you'd be limited to only one that you ever use. But if the assessment itself is somehow specific to the crop information or the pest, in my case, it's not, I don't even have a pest defined, you certainly can include some of that information. Kind of up to the strategy you might devise, but in general, probably not. Then we have timing information. Again, these are usually kind of auto-calculated and definitely specific to this one trial. So really wouldn't make sense to include any of those. It is possible, I suppose, for that equipment, if there's really only the one type of equipment that you use. But in general, these are a little less of a focus. And some of these miscellaneous ones, definitely not your data reliability. Action code, maybe not. That one, unless you're using a calculation, which we'll see in a little bit. Since it's empty for me, it's totally irrelevant anyway. So that's kind of the thought process going through here. Hopefully it's a little easier now than it used to be even a year ago, where things were all scattered throughout the column. We can kind of focus here on this one group now as the logical things you typically would include to standardize. Okay, so I have made my selection here, and let's press OK. And that third component is study rules. If you don't have any study rules in that column that we selected, then there is no prompting of any kind anyway. So in this case, ARM just kind of skipped that part because there was nothing. And now we are ready to save the SE. So it's a standard evaluation. The extension itself is .se. And we can just save it onto our computer here. So the file name, I guess you kind of have two options, and I didn't spend much time on that SE description, and then there's also an SE name row. If you keep the file name short enough and you had the SE name is empty, then the name you give this file will also end up in ARM when you load it as the SE name field. Certainly you can kind of pre-fill, type in the name. It's a little tricky, I think, with the name, because it'll have you try to load the SE, but more so for the description. So let's fill in a name. In my case, we're dealing with, this was our general Fido. Maybe I'll just do general Fido. We didn't include a crop, so that pretty much sums it up. Giving a name that kind of tells you what it is helpful to remember when we're loading it. And then once I save and choose the file name, there's one more request to fill in the description. And this will get filled as your SE description if you didn't have it filled and saved in your SE. So this can be the nice human readable summary of what this assessment is. So maybe I'll call that our Fido on leaf, something like that, whatever you want to kind of casually refer to it as. So this generates a file on my computer that I can use again and again. So if I go over to the very end here and I want to perform that phyto again, what I can do, and really anywhere in this empty column, is I can insert that SE from a file. So this shows that same folder where I just saved my SE file. And it's as if we copied just those rows that we had selected before and pasted them into this brand new column. And you can see there's that SE description. If I come into my view, so I can turn on, I'll go and then hide empty fields to compress it a little bit. There's that SE name got filled in, as well as the SE description from my file. And there we have just the rows that we chose. So you'll notice I have no crop selected because we didn't save it in our file, but the rest of that description that we cared about is saved. Let's do this one more time because I want to show I look in this column, so I did the PhyGen, I did a figure, and then we took a disease severity on 10 leaves. We kind of did this over and over again throughout the season. And then we calculated a percent of check from that severity. So let's say that's kind of a very common thing I do, and I'd like to save this so that way I don't have to keep copying those two columns again and again every time I go out. So once again, we'll right click and export an SE. This time starting with column 3. So I can choose columns 3 and 4. I'll be picky and put them in that order. It won't really matter. So we'll actually choose more than one column to save together in one SE, one standard evaluation. So we have that same selection as last time, but we can see for these two columns, there's actually quite a bit more information that was entered. So maybe I also want to grab the sample size if I always do 10 leaves, perhaps, as part of my standard way to perform that. Maybe we'll choose again not to include the crop or the pest because those would vary depending on the trial that we're in. But I do want to include the ARM action codes row because column 4, that's where our calculation is actually performed. So if I don't include the action codes row, then there will be no calculation. I'd have to remember to go in and create the calculation every time with that SE. So here we've got the Abbott's calculation, our percent of check. for our pest severity assessment. And maybe I'll include my number of decimals because I don't really like seeing all of those decimal places that I usually end up with for a calculation like that. Once again, we can save this. So we'll just say it's our pest severity and percent of the untreated check. Maybe if I always refer to that, the description you've got a little longer to go with, but I'll just be pretty brief here. Oh, if I double click there. All right, so we've created that file. And just to show us loading it one more time, if I needed to perform that once again, we certainly can. Insert from file, and we can load that SE. And you can see we've got the SE name and description from that file, but then that description, oops, that we saved for both columns. And it does handle that calculation. It'll make sure to always update the column reference. So although when we saved it back here in column 3, technically it said tab of column 3, ARM is smart enough when it saves that SE, well, I'm not going to hard code to save column 3 as my calculation. It references that, oh, we're talking about the previous column. So that way, when we're over here and we load it again, it's smart enough to point to this column here, R15. So you can include calculations in your SE as well. One other thing, as we have inserted those SEs, is in your site description, or if you're in a protocol, it would be the protocol description. Either one of them have a tab called SE definitions. And when you load an SE from file into a study, it'll actually also add it to this SE definitions section. And the goal for these SE definitions is to plan out the SEs that should be used for this study. Again, it could be in a protocol that we want to plan out all of our SEs. That'll go to all of the trials in our series, or if we're just working in a trial like this, same exact thing. For this one trial, it keeps track of the ones we have loaded. And I could also, if I had wanted to, ahead of time, instead of loading it in the assessment section, I can load one here as well. So there's a shortcut button to insert from file, or it's also in the right click, insert SE from file, and it'll do the same thing. So I could grab another one here. I've got some herbicide assessment that obviously doesn't belong in this study, but we'll just grab it anyway. And that allows me to select that SE to say now there's 3 different types of assessments that will be performed for this trial. And now they're all available to me. Specifically, they're available when I'm in the assessment section. We'll go over to the end here again, a new column. So if I'm ready to perform a new assessment, when I click into the SE name row of a new column, we actually see this list of SEs. And this list is specifically the ones that are in the SE definitions tab for this one trial. And to the right, if I can get that to pull over here, I see a preview. So if I'm not totally sure what this is, but you can see we've got the SE name and the description, as well as some of the information in there. The preview pane on the right kind of gives us an idea of what it is that will be loaded if I choose that SE. So then when I click OK, it's the exact same thing as when I right-click and insert it from File. We loaded that SE. This time it was just from the list of ones, quote unquote, the approved SEs for this trial. Okay. So the next thing to do, kind of see this, it's one thing kind of thrown together at the end of a trial, but I think what I want to do next is create a new protocol. So we can kind of see from a totally fresh start how that'll look. So I will create a new protocol. Everything, the defaults here will work just fine. And in the protocol, we have the assessment header, we just don't have a spot for data. But over here under the protocol description, there is that SE definitions section again for us here. So using our example again, we can insert the SEs, and we may as well do the ones we had chosen before. I can repeat that process to select them. I don't know why it's telling me that. And this will load up and link these SEs for this protocol. And the advantage is now every trial that is generated from this protocol will have this list of SEs in the trials as well. So I can communicate to the trialists, these are what you should use to fill in assessments. And just real quick here, we won't go into too much detail, but on that protocol side, what happens, since those SE files were just on my computer right now, if I were to send this protocol to someone, they don't have those SE files on their computer. They're only saved on mine. So ARM, when you're in a protocol and you attach an SE, it actually attaches the SE file to the study as well. So this way, whoever receives the protocol, or if I create a trial and then send it on, whoever receives that study, I need to make sure to include the attachments as well, so that way they have those SE files too. So ARM can load those descriptions when they create their assessments. A slick way to make sure that you include those SEs is if you use File and Send To. And when you do that, these sub options are really just saved options. You can have two different sets of options. Then, it's going to want me to save. I guess we'll just save this real quick just to my desktop, and I'll just say it's my webinar protocol. When I do a send to, there is an option to include any attachments. This way, when I send this protocol on, or like I said, if I create a trial, the exact same thing will happen. These will be as attachments in that trial that I generate. And then if I send the trial instead, either way, I would want to make sure to include those SE files. And if I have ARM generate the email, that's a lot easier because it will automatically include any attachments. So I don't have to go browse out for them. So to answer the question, in theory, you do need to get give those SE files to the user. If you use this send to, the attachments will come with automatically. And you don't have to worry too much about this path. So if we send those SEs, the individual can just put those SE files even in the same folder as wherever they save that trial. And when they open it up, ARM is smart enough that if this literal path, it's got this whole path of where that file is at. If on someone else's computer, that file isn't there, ARM first looks around a little bit to see if it can find where that file is now. Oh, maybe that got moved, that attachment. And the first thing it looks at is this folder where the trial or the protocol is opened from. So you don't have to worry too much about this path as long as you get that file itself in the same folder where that trial is, everything will be good. So if you're using an SE file that you have created, like we did here, where I've saved these two to my computer, then you do need to send these files. ARM is automatically attaching them. So if you send the file with ARM and you've included attachments, it'll flow really smoothly and it'll just come with. But if you do create your own email and just attach the PRT file, just be aware of that. Good question. If the other person has an SE of the exact same name, I guess the best thing to do would be to have them save these SEs when they unload that file that you sent. Just make sure that all of those attachments are in the same folder as the trial or the protocol file. That way, if they have happened to save a pest severity and %check SE file, that'll be in this folder on their computer. And so that way there won't be any any issue as far as overriding their SE with my SE, because it would be in separate spots. Hopefully that would be pretty rare to happen, but a good point if you just happen to be unlucky and we're naming things the same. And maybe that's a good motivation to just stick your company name at the end of your SE file name or something, just to make sure that that's less likely to happen of having an SE named exactly the same. Great questions. And you definitely could send a batch of SEs as if maybe there's quite a few studies that you're working on with them as a group, and all of these SEs are what we have you use. It's certainly possible to do that. In that case, like I said, I'd probably put the company name in the name of all your SEs, so it's kind of obvious that those all came from Birgit. When I'm working with Birgit and I'm her trialist, I know those all came from her company. And you can certainly, these files are just files on your computer, so you can always just go out to that location. I have it bookmarked because I'm always going over there, but it's in this program data GDM def folder. And if you just sort by type, you can find the SEs without too much grief, and you could put them all together. So I could grab my whole list of a bunch of them that I created, zip them up, put them in a zip file or however they want to send them, and that individual then could put them all on their computer. So once you have those SEs loaded in the SE definitions, then they'll be available in that assessment data section. Now, one other thing, almost a bait and switch where we spent all this time talking about how to create your own SEs, there might be a gigantic shortcut to almost everything that we've talked about so far. because if you're in the SE definitions section, protocol or trial, either one, if you go to the SE name row, there is a favorites list of every time that you load in an SE that you've created, it'll get put into this favorites list associated to the SE name. But there is actually a master list as well. Just to show one more time, actually, this is in the SE name. On your SE definitions section, there is a master list in the SE name that has hundreds and hundreds of SEs. You can see me just scrolling through. There are tons of SEs available. We have had multiple global sponsors that have worked to create their system of SEs, and were gracious enough to share them, to say, hey, we've got this huge list. There's nothing magical or proprietary. It's just the way we're describing assessments. How about make those available to the industry? So we've had two big, so you'll kind of see two maybe different systems if you're scrolling and comparing some of the SEs, different numbering systems overall that really have contributed to this list of SEs that anyone can use. So the SE name might not mean a whole lot to find something, but using the SE description, you can just right click in that column and do a filter for to try to find whether there's already an SE that does that. So, I mean, we'll just use my example where I went and created a phyto rating based on how I was describing it. I could instead come to this list and see if there's one that matches what I was, setting out to create anyway. So maybe I don't have to make my own. Maybe I can find in this list a kind of a new standard way for me to describe that type of assessment. So here's a percent Phyto on the fruit. I think my example were leaves. Actually, maybe this X008. That looks pretty close to the way I had done it already. But here, this SE is already created for me. So number one, I didn't have to create my own. I found one that is the thing I do already, a percent Phyto on leaves. And there wasn't anything weird. It'll mesh really well with my previous year studies anyway, because this is more or less how I described it. And another advantage is now I don't have to worry about those SE files, because this list is the same for everyone using ARM. So everyone already has X008 SE. So I don't need to worry about attaching this X008 file. It's actually not even a file on my computer. It's stashed in the dictionary database within ARM. Everyone's got it. So now I don't have to worry to make sure I pass those along. There's a question here about not seeing the favorites. Is the tab at the top, do you not even have favorites, or is your favorites empty? Because the favorites over here would be, let me remove my filter quick. These would be all the SEs that I have created and loaded onto my computer, or that I've also used here in this list. I can save one of these to my favorites list. So if your favorites list is empty, perhaps you just have not added one either by creating your own, or real quickly, you could try by just selecting really any of them in the master list and adding it. Okay, no favorites at all. Kind of peek at that as we go along here. Yeah, so you'll want to look here right above the main list in the upper left corner, right under SE name list. It says display all, and then there's a favorites. So I do see that in your screenshot. It's just kind of stashed up here in the corner. Or there's a button to display favorites down here. Hopefully that help you see that list of favorites once you've added one. If not, oh, okay, I see your screenshot here. I wonder, it's like, wait, that's the same one I had selected. But certainly if you're still having troubles, we can work together. Yeah, you don't have one. Right offhand, I'm not sure why. Perhaps you're in a customized version. So if you're in one of the customizations, of course, then that company has already kind of defined what SEs are available as a whole. That would be my guess. So if you open up a non-customized version, the standard GDM def file, then go to the SE definitions, and hopefully you'll see that favorites list. And if you can't get it from there, send us an email. We can kind of help maybe connect with a remote session and try to troubleshoot. But that would be my guess, is that must be a customized ARM version that you're in. Okay, so one last time here to find. Again, this is a huge list, hundreds and hundreds of items in this list. So use that filter for, and you can do it on any column. If you know for sure what the part rated is, that you're interested in or whatever, you can really use any of these columns here. I think the most practical thing probably is that SE description to have a keyword. And I'll just repeat my FIDO example just to show what that does. Is it limits the list, and it only shows items from this list that contains that keyword. So now I'm down to quite a bit fewer, and then just clicking on one of these, you can look to the right to preview to see what all is involved. So here, some of them are multi-columns. So here, this is working with the 1-to-7 scale. So you put in your scale totals, and then there's some calculations to calculate your control, incident severity, things like that. So that can be really helpful as well, to have a bunch of columns kind of all in one shot. Once you find one that you want to use, again, you can use that add to favorites button. So that way you don't have to search and find it every time. One other trick, if you're seeing one that's pretty close, this is about the idea I want, but maybe I do subsamples, or I don't quite like the writing type they chose, or something like that, where you can use these as a springboard to create your own. There's nothing that says you have to use the contents of this SE and you can't change them. So if I wanted to, I could load this SE. So I'll pick this 002. That loads it here in my SE definitions. So then I can come here and load it into a column. Then I can make my changes. I can tweak how I want it, or maybe it's not on the whole plant. Maybe it's only the leaves. I'll just cheat just to make it easy. Well, I don't really want that because that's definitely wrong. Leaf, oops. And we'll just say total, just to be quick. Make the change however you want. Maybe I never ever use reporting basis, so I just want the sample size, or maybe I don't like putting one plot for my sample size because I'm not doing subsamples. Make it your own, and then you can export an SE. So feel free to use this as a springboard to just load something in and change it to the way you want it, and then save it as your own onto your computer, and then kind of start the process like we showed at the beginning. That's totally allowed as well. But hopefully that master list can save some time to get you kick-started on SEs, save a little bit. If you were worried about the way those attachments work and making sure your trial lists have them, then use this list and find ones in the master list. Everyone that has an ARM software has that list. So no attachment concerns. Don't have to worry. Anyone that runs ARM, their ARM will know CF018 is percent of infected callers. Nothing else has to happen. And we're just about out of time. Just wanted to run through, and we kind of hinted at some of these, some tips and tricks for trying to get started with this. It can sound like it's a lot of work, but like I said, this time of year, you know the pain points, you know things that caused troubles this last season. If you do a little work to prepare now, things can go so much smoother when you don't have time in the middle of next season. And that's really the motivation, hopefully, to try these out. So just some practical things we see that really help people. Like we mentioned, if you start in last year's trial, this one that just completed, that's a great way to see the way that things have been described, and then you don't have to start from scratch on filling things in. Or that master list to say, hey, maybe I'll just kind of redo. I'll use that master list to find out how to describe these. I don't have to do it the same as last year. We'll start kind of this new process maybe. And you don't have to create an SE for every single type of assessment right now in order to start using SEs. There's no reason if you just create 3. I'm just going to take my top 3 that I do again and again and again. I'll just make 3 of them and see how it goes. That's great. You'll see the time savings. You'll get to play with it a little bit, and the next year you can make another 3. Or maybe you realize, hey, that was super great. Let me make a whole bunch more. You can always start simple and tweak and improve the process. So maybe those 3 that you created this year, at this time next year, you go, that was cool, but I really wish I didn't include the crop, or I wish I put a study rule in there. Whatever, you can always export an SE right over the top and just name it the exact same as you did last year. And then that following year, you'll still be loading that same SE, but it'll have that slightly tweaked content. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can always improve each year as you go, but that first step is usually the toughest one. And once you start, then it gets easier as you go. If you have a group of colleagues that are working in ARM, it can be helpful to get together and make SEs as a group. And maybe you open up last year's trial, or you just sit together, somebody shares their screen and just go through the master list. But working together, you get kind of a group think of all the different things that can go wrong to get the SEs that you want, to catch anything that usually causes problems. And you saw those SE files. If you are creating your own, they're tiny little files that just live on your computer. So when you're done with that session, you have kind of the one main person that created them all. They just have to go and grab each of those files on their computer and email them to everyone else, or drop them onto the company network, and everyone can copy those SEs onto their own computers after that session, so that everyone's working with those same SEs. And then finally, we talked about how study rules can be in SEs. Don't really have time to show that all the way through, but definitely when you have some requirement at the time of filling in the data that you want to make sure pieces of information get filled in, having that study rule on that column when you create it means that every time that SE is loaded, that rule will be there for that specific column to make sure everything gets filled in. All right, well, that's everything I had for SEs. Feel free, if you start trying to play with them and you have some troubles, let us know. But hopefully, between that master list and creating your own, it can get you started. Little bit of time now is going to save tons and tons next year. So, thanks everyone for the great questions throughout. And hopefully we'll be seeing you again at our new shortened webinars next month.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.